freedom, adventure, create.
You are listening to The Brave Files, real stories from people living courageously. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does make a difference, and we appreciate it. Now here's your host, Heather Vickery.
Hey everybody, it's Heather Vickery. Welcome to this episode of the Brave Files podcast. I am so glad you are here with us. Today's guest is someone I've known and admired professionally for a long time. He's the founder of Rhodes Perry Consulting and the host of the Out Entrepreneur podcast, which I've had the honor to be a guest on. You guys got to go check it out. It's linked in the show notes. Rhodes is an impressive person. He has an impressive resume, having worked at places like the White House and PFLAG and for the city of New York. And while we're going to talk about all of the cool things Rhodes has and is doing professionally, I want to open the conversation by talking about the bravest thing Rhodes has ever done, coming out as transgender. Rhodes, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's awesome to be on your show, and it was great having you on episode 27 of mine. It's
nice drop there, episode 27. I love it. Yeah. Back in the early days.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah. I have to say, though, while, like I said, we've known each other for a while, and you're actually good personal friends with Bernadette, my partner. Yeah. I don't know anything about your personal journey, really. So I feel like that's not anybody's business to ask unless it's offered or mutually consented upon. So all of you listening, don't ask people their coming out story unless they offer it. But I'm very excited now. Here you are in this format, and I am really interested in hearing all about your story because you are such an inspiration.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. The feeling is mutual, and coming out. That's a big topic for
it's
sure.
Such a big, and I was like, wow, how do I start this? Well, the first thing I want to ask you, and I know it's funny when we prepped for this call, you're like, okay, which coming out story do you want? So we're gonna go there. But the question that I find the most interesting, and we have had several guests on the show who are parents of transgender children. When did you realize that the body given to you at birth was not meant for you?
Yeah. I think for me, gender, it's kind of, for me, it's beyond the body, so I'm really, I love my body. I want to say that.
All right.
I definitely experienced gender dysphoria when I was really young. And so for context, I just celebrated my 39th birthday. So when my journey was, yeah. Oh, thank you. That makes me feel good.
That's because I'm older than you. I have to say that.
Yeah. So, I think for me, growing up in like the early 80s, like as a little kid, I always, I had an older brother. He's 2 years older than me, still have him in my life, and he's awesome. But I was just the tag along little kid. And I always viewed myself as just like him, so in my mind, I was always a little boy. Right. And there was, in the world that we lived in the 80s, and I think now to a certain extent, being viewed as a tomboy up to a certain age is somewhat acceptable.
Sure.
And so I could get away with that, for a while, where I was like, I felt like my most authentic self at 5.
It is totally different, I think, right? Yeah. Because if you're born into a male body and you are not male, it's much harder to just let that slide, right? But you're right. Totally. Being a tomboy, okay.
Yeah.
People totally give you a pass for that.
Yeah. And I think, it's the world that we live in that is incredibly sexist. And so things that are viewed more feminine, it's, it's the injustices of the world. Right. And I think, for kids who are assigned female at birth, who identify as transgender or non-binary, there's a little bit of, just a little bit, at least at that time in history, of freedom, just to kind of explore gender in a way, up until puberty. And then that's when things kind of went sideways for me, where I was like, what is going on?
That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah. And the socialization of like, this is how girls behave and you can't dress like that. And, I grew up in a very, very Catholic family. My parents are awesome. They've gone on an awesome journey with me, but, adolescence adolescence was a tough time. It's a tough time for all of us, right?
It
I think
is. No
for
matter what, it's already bad
totally.
enough.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think for LGBT kids, whether it's things around your sexual orientation or your gender identity, it becomes even more confusing because there's the social cues of what's socially acceptable, what you see in media, and thankfully things have changed somewhat since I was growing up. But it becomes, there's a lot of conflicting messages of staying true to who you are and living independently, right? I mean, that's one of the
Hmm.
developmental milestones as teenagers, is like you become yourself, you
Yeah,
figure things out. And when you see negative things being portrayed around LGBT community, it becomes really hard. And I grew up in Central Florida, by no means,
ooh,
an
yeah.
LGBT mecca. I mean, even when I
Oh
go back
man,
home, by Cape Canaveral, there are no rainbow flags, and even though it's a very high number of same-sex couples raising kids, what we know from demographic research, it's still visibly a tough place, I think, to be LGBT. And it's one of the reasons why I never moved back home after college. It
fair
just
enough.
wasn't good for me.
We had
Yeah.
a guest on the show several months ago, Jennifer Grosshandler, and she has a project. What do they call it? The Gender Cool Project. So I don't know if you've listened to that episode, but if you haven't, you should go check it out. Her daughter, her transgender daughter, inspired her to change the language and the conversation around these kids because everything she researched was negative, just like you said. Everything she was hearing was sad and scary and frustrating. And she said these kids have so much talent. They have so many gifts, and they were on a mission to share that, and change the dialogue around it. So I
I love
love
that.
that work.
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful.
It is super powerful, and I agree. Like there's so many stories of resilience and empowerment, and just the perspective that we trans folks can provide, especially around conversations on gender. Whenever I
Yeah,
hear opposition groups, and I'm going to use the quotes, quote unquote, talking about gender confused people, referring to
confused.
trans folks,
Nice
I'm like,
word.
if anyone is confused about gender, it would
It's
be,
you.
someone using that phrase and
Yes.
casting it towards trans people, because I can guarantee, trans communities, we, we think about gender all the time,
All the damn time. There's
Yes.
no confusion here.
None. None. For sure.
Wow. Well, so then, okay, once you hit adolescence, it became more difficult to just let things slide. So, at what point did you realize there needed to be a coming out of some sort, and what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. So adolescence for me was really about, I had one goal, which was I'm just going to do well in school. I'm going to do well in sports. I'm going to keep my head down, survive, and go off to college out of Florida.
Yeah,
That was it. That
get
was
out
my
of
goal,
Florida.
and it was really like I conformed,
Wow.
because and I think it was subconscious. It was like, in order to
Survival.
survive,
Yeah.
yeah, in order to survive here, this is the rule book, like as much as I couldn't stand it, I was raised Catholic. We went to church every Sunday, have to dress up, and it just I felt like Sunday
Oh
drag,
God. And a dress.
and
Oh, that just had to be
yeah,
awful.
it was bad, but the freedom that I had was, and this is probably a savior for me, is that I was a pretty good athlete. And so playing sports, just kind of doing cross country, I was
Hmm.
big runner, so it's like, okay, I'm just wearing a track uniform. It's not like, I
Right.
could kind of hide
Sure.
it through sports, and just kind of the camaraderie, the kind of instant friendship. That was what got me through middle school, high school, and it just kind of allowed me to be in this kind of gender-free world. As much as
Yeah.
sports are kind of like gender segregated, I tended to do sports that were more, anyone who has a pair of sneakers can run. You know
Right.
what I
It's
mean? So it wasn't.
interesting that you bring up cross country, and I'm just thinking about it as an adolescent. My oldest does track, and she is she'd kill me for this. She's very well developed, and it's like her nemesis, right? She's like, how do I tame these things? How do I keep them from hurting when I run? And I'm just picturing you like having to add that onto it. You're already trying to not be this
Totally.
person, that had to just suck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fortunately, probably I love this, and this was also like a source of like anxiety in the house was that I was more of a late bloomer, in
Oh,
terms
well,
of
that's
my
good.
first
That
my
worked out
first
well for
puberty,
you.
So it wasn't until 15 that I really had to deal with all of that, and then I was like, oh my God, what is going on? It's like that to me was kind of and I viewed it at the time, and again, like denial is intense, so
Yeah.
for me it was like, oh well, I'm just I'm having a hard time because my body is changing and that's impacting the way that I'm playing sports. It's like all of this kind of, I just intellectualized a lot at that time, and kind of growing up in a Catholic house, you know expressing feelings was not something that we
Mm.
did so skillfully, right?
Yeah.
So I was having all these feelings, and it wasn't until I went away to college that I started to unpack who I am in the world, and like all those things that you kind of romanticize about what college is about.
And where did you go to college?
Oh, so this is another interesting twist and turn, but I ended up going to Notre Dame, which is in South Bend, Indiana, Catholic college,
So
private.
you couldn't wait to get out of Central Florida where they weren't very welcoming, and you found yourself at a very Catholic college in Indiana.
Totally, totally. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And and here's the thing is that even though, I grew up in a more kind of purple county, the church that we went to it was in the spirit of social justice. So we worked with migrant
Well,
laborers.
that's nice.
Yeah, so it had like a progressive feel to it. We had bilingual mass, and I was able to kind of practice my Spanish by going to church and things like that. So my impression of like a Catholic college was kind of, I thought it was going to be like the parish that I went to.
Oh,
And I didn't realize, I mean, this is part of the education, right? Of like, oh,
yeah.
there's like different factions within the Catholic Church. And I was lucky to be a part of a more social justice minded part. And when I went to Notre Dame, I got to see more of the business side of the Catholic Church, and kind of the influence that the Vatican had over like the dogma of the Catholic Church, and things that didn't feel like in the spirit of a freedom fighter, like in the spirit of Jesus Christ, And so, yeah, so that got me to question my faith. I'm like, what is this? This is not what I thought
Right.
of kind of Christianity. And, eventually, I'm a very spiritual person. I'm not one that is, I'm no longer Catholic. I very much was socialized as a Catholic, but yeah, and I kind of lost my Catholicism at Notre Dame.
Isn't that
And
interesting? That's
yeah,
probably not their goal over at
no,
Notre
no,
Dame. Yeah.
no. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that they really, but they do encourage like freedom of thought, and I wouldn't have had that space had I not gone there. I think I went to grad school at NYU, and I always ponder like if I did that in the inverse, well, I probably wouldn't have done it in the inverse. I probably would have gone to NYU and other
And
progressive.
not gone to Notre Dame. Right.
Totally, totally. So the thing that I mean, there are many things I value about going to Notre Dame, but is that it allowed me to really question what I believed, what I wanted in life, where I was going, and it put me in like the pressure cooker of so many of my classmates were very, very conservative. So, we're talking about feminism in the classroom, we're talking about LGBT rights, we're talking about so many different things. And I was always like the sole hand that would raise and be like, provide the opposite, of
Nice.
an opposite view.
And
And
you studied gender studies, right?
yeah, economics and gender studies.
Quite a combo.
Yeah, and gender studies. Wow. I mean, that is what gave me the language to study myself, to understand
Wow.
that there's LGBT communities out there. And I've come out so many, I've been almost every letter under the LGBT umbrella until I've kind of landed on, I'm a transgender guy, I'm bisexual, right?
Okay.
So when I was at Notre Dame my like first year, so I'm like 18, I'm thinking, wow, I have never really been in a relationship, I've never really been interested in guys. And I had a really good friend who he was gay, and he encouraged me to go to this group called Outreach ND. And I was like, sure, I'll go as an ally. And, I really, I'm there for you, Dan. So like show up to this event and there's this woman speaking, and she's like this this amazing organizer, campus organizer. And she's like, we're having a hunger strike because we don't have equal rights on campus. We don't have protections as LGBT students. And, as she's talking, there's more and more of what's going on for me where I'm like, oh, I think this is about me too. I think that, so anyway, long story short, like we ended up dating and I thought
So you
everything.
came
Yeah.
out as gay first, or at least is that what you
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah. I came
Yeah.
out, that first year I came out as a lesbian, I'm a woman, I'm a lesbian, I'm a feminist. This totally makes sense. I thought like everything that was going on for me when I was younger was really about my sexual orientation,
Okay.
which in part some of it was, right? And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of my coming out story. And I was, for those first couple of years in college, I was really, I've always long been a feminist, and
Yeah.
I'm a very proud feminist.
My daughter was schooling one of her male classmates, who was like, "Why are you feminist? What does that mean?" And she totally gave him all the reasons that he either was or should be. And in the end, he
Yes.
walked away and he was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe I am a feminist." So
Yes. I love it. I love it. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And for those of you most of you who listen are pretty well educated on this, and you know me, and this stuff isn't news to you, but I'm just going to ask Rhodes to clarify. I'll have you do it because this is your level of expertise. The difference in your gender identity and your sexual identity.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All
Because
right.
they're not the
So
same, friends.
they are not the same. Absolutely not. So sexual orientation, just think of your heart, who you're romantically, physically, emotionally attracted to. And you could be attracted to people of the same sex, the opposite sex, opposite genders. You could be attracted to no one. You can be asexual.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different ways that you can identify your sexual orientation. And when I was younger, I was trying to figure that out because I knew I wasn't straight. That was one thing I was pretty clear on. And my first 2 years of college totally made sense. I really like women. Got it. Okay, that's great. And then I had this moment. So when I was in undergrad, I interned at the National Organization for Women, which was a fascinating time to be there in Washington, D.C. They were having conversations at the time of, will we welcome trans women into our organization or
Oh,
not?
wow. And what year was this?
This was 2001, the
Okay.
summer of 2001.
Okay.
So right before 9/11 happened. So it's like, and that was a really pivotal moment for the organization. And there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of cisgender women who felt like this is not the organization I want to be a part of, and a lot of the folks that felt that way, just they've never met trans people. They've never met a trans
Yeah.
woman. And so there was a lot of education that was happening. It was amazing. And I was a part of that. And I was like, wow, and that planted a seed for me where I was like, okay, I'm around a lot of trans folks and I get this, like there's something intuitive about it that was like a
Mm.
part of me. And again, subconsciously, I just was not that aware, and so I kind of like was like, okay, that popped up and I learned a lot. And the organization actually, they decided to include trans women at that
Thankfully.
time. It was awesome. They
Yeah.
were the first national women's organization to do that, which was huge.
Wow.
So it was like trans women are women. They got that in 2001, as an organizational statement, and really led the way. And I was really proud to be a part of that. And that,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that following year, I was back in DC, and this was on International Women's Day, which is March 8th, and that was the day. So I'm at this event, and I'm like, I'm here as an ally.
Oh, wow.
I'm trans. Like I figured it out on that day.
Wow. What triggered, like, what brought it home for you?
I think it was just all of the learning that
Mm.
that there was something that consciously woke up for me. And I think it was being at that event with women and realizing that's not how I identify. And that
Yeah.
doesn't take away me being a feminist, right?
Right.
Like that was a conflict for me for a while. Like, I'm being transgender, am I turning my back on
Right.
women, or like,
No.
it was
Yeah.
just the
Absolutely not.
personal
Yeah.
personal struggle. And it was like, no, I am myself, and I can still believe in, equity for everyone. Right. And that looks different. And I can still be a feminist as a man. Right. And so,
Absolutely.
And at that moment too, it was one of those things that was, I was losing something too. I was losing, women's community. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not a woman. So this is something I let go, and I can still be on that journey as an ally, and I can show up in different ways. And,
Change.
fast forward 20 years, and, I definitely show up in lots of different ways, usually in male only space when people say ridiculous things where I'm like, what
Absolutely.
and this, so I often feel like a Trojan horse in those kind of spaces. But yeah, so
I
that's
could see
that's
that.
like the truncated version of the.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. So you'd mentioned that you have these great, loving, supportive parents. What kind of reaction did they have the first time you came out, and what kind of reaction did they have the second time you came
Oh
out?
my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. It was a journey. I will say this at the beginning of this, is that my parents are like the P flag parents.
Love
They're
that.
amazing, amazing. And like like a lot of P flag parents, they have an evolution. And
Hmm.
so the first time I came out was not so great. So anyone thinking about coming out, maybe not writing a 20-page letter with like lots of,
Oh,
it was like a research report. But I'm like, here are things that you need to know. And I'm such a nerd. So I like read every book that I could, especially books like written by like Andrew Sullivan, right? Who's like one of the most conservative gay guys that I know. He's also Catholic, right? And so he's written a lot of discourse on resolving the kind of rift between Catholicism and being a part of the
hmm.
LGBT community. So my strategy was, I'm going to give them this letter on Memorial Day weekend.
Oh my
I'm
God.
going to drive to my girlfriend's house, which was across the state in Florida. She lived in Gainesville at the time. And then come back a couple of days later after they've processed, and clearly they're going to open their
Fine.
arms and
It's
be
going to be
super
fine. They have
accepting.
all this proof, all this evidence. So that could be a
Totally.
problem. Oh
Yes,
my-
yeah. And and we've always had like such a great relationship. So I'm like, they'll catch up. They'll be up to speed, So this is something clearly I've been thinking about my whole life. And I just drop this on them and expect them to be at the
to
same
get
place
it
that I am,
right away.
right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of young people.
Were
Like,
they
come on.
surprised?
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
They were both really surprised. And again, it's like kind of denial and
Yeah.
like
Not
parents.
completely
Yeah.
paying attention there. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have, like parents, they have dreams and hopes, and they
Sure.
see the future for me. And, that future was probably get married to a man and have lots of kids, and,
Yep. Like a good Catholic girl.
yeah, yeah, which was not me. uh, you know, None of that. And yeah, so I came back, and I got the silent treatment from my dad,
Mm.
and my mom. Like, to her credit, the first, she's crying, but she's like, I love you. I will always love you. That will never change. So like that very kind of family acceptance, like
Yeah.
that's what you want to hear. However, like then you start processing and talking, and they don't have the language that I had at that time. I'm like, oh, you guys talking about this so unskillfully.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that was really fascinating, and this was just me coming out around my sexual orientation at that time, is my mom saying things that were more around my gender identity. Well, are you going to cut all your hair off? Are you going
Oh, well,
to?
because her perspective of a lesbian was a butch
Mhm.
lesbian, right?
Totally,
So I
totally.
remember my
Right.
mom asking me about Bernadette when we first, she said, so she hadn't seen pictures. So is she like you? And I said, I don't know. What do you mean? She's like, well, does she dress like you? Like, it was really
Totally,
like,
totally. Yeah.
I go, are you asking me if she's butch? And my mom goes, oh, no, I would never use that language. And I said, it's not a bad word, Mom.
Yeah. You're like, it's a great word.
It's not a
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
word. And no, she's
Totally.
not, but she still
Yeah.
doesn't wear dresses. Sorry.
Totally.
We derailed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's totally relevant. And yeah, I mean, that popped up, the gender expression pieces.
Yep.
But there was a piece that was like more about, like, then she started to go into asking about surgery, like, am I going to
Whoa.
modify my body? Yeah. And so that to
So
me,
she
like,
knew before you did.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Like when I was like really young, and I think parents know. I think parents
Hmm.
know, you've got a lot of parents that listen on the show that have trans or non-binary kids. It's like you see your kid's personality, their
Hmm.
behavior, like what they gravitate towards. And she always saw that, I mean, and to my parents' credit, I mean, they grew up, I mean, they were born in northeastern Ohio in Youngstown, lived in Central Florida for most of their adult lives. There wasn't a lot of access to, I mean, the idea of even a PFLAG chapter was so far out of reach for them. And I
Sure.
think for a lot of folks, even now, in certain areas of the country or the world, like there isn't that access, that even with the internet, it's sometimes hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for. So yeah, I think that was always in her mind of like, I think my kid is, a boy,
Yeah.
like, and I don't know what to do. And I'm deathly
That's
afraid of
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah, that's always been fascinating to me, and at the time when she said that, I was so mad. I was like, this has nothing to do
Yeah.
with like my gender. It's who I'm attracted to, right? So it goes back to that difference between sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yep.
Uh, fast forward,
You
the
get them
next
on
time,
board with this
yeah,
and they're
I get them on
supportive.
board.
And then
Totally. And then,
bam.
yeah, and they were totally, they came around. They're like, all right, cool. All right. Our daughter is a lesbian. We got it. We're good. And this is like 2 years later, I, and the second time there was no kind of research paper. There wasn't any,
Thank goodness.
I didn't even have a plan. I had started testosterone.
Wow.
I was 3 months on testosterone when I came home. So, at
Let
that
me ask
point,
you, that day you
yeah.
were at the rally and you realized this isn't me,
Mhm.
how soon after that did you take action?
Well, at that point, so that was March 8th of 2002. I told all my friends that I went to that day. I was like crying. I was like,
Wow.
I'm trans. And they were like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they
Oh,
gave me a hug,
yeah, we
and
get it.
and
Yeah.
it was, and that was the moment, like socially, that I transitioned, right? So like, for most trans or non-binary people, we all go through sharing our coming out in a different way of how we
Hmm.
talk about our gender, maybe using different pronouns, maybe using a different name, maybe starting to dress more in alignment with the gender that we are.
Right.
And that was the moment for me that I socially transitioned.
Did you change your name?
Yeah, I did. And it was a funny process, but how I landed on Rhodes is one of the happiest days of my life. I was actually in Greece, and I was in Rhodes
That's
on the
cool.
island. And I wanted a name that kind of was unique, because my birth name was a very, very, very common name. And I was like, I just want a name that,
You're only a
like,
little
when I
younger
hear
than
it,
me, so and
yeah,
I will not ask you to share, but like I don't know, Stephanie, Kristen, Heather, Jennifer. So we all have the
it
same
was a
damn
very,
names.
very common name. I would just leave it at that. I was like, I do not want a name where I turn around and like five other people turn around.
Right.
So, and I also wanted a name that just reminded me of like this journey that I'm creating,
Absolutely.
a life that I'm being very intentional about. So that's how I landed on my name. And,
Love it.
it was a couple years after that that I started to medically transition and legally transition. So the legal transition was like, all right, I'm changing my name legally, which is a whole, whole process.
Right. And it's not easy at all.
No, no. So transferring all the legal documents that way, having to like sign up for the draft, or like the military, because I was under
Oh,
26. It was so just,
wow.
yeah, it's a big shift. And at that point, that in between time, so I socially transitioned for 2 years. I was more comfortable, I guess, like the more common term now would be non-binary. I was more comfortable, like
Right.
just having my own gender. Like I am Rhodes, and at that time I was using Z and here pronouns,
And
but only
is
like a
NB,
handful of
do I have that
people.
right? Is NB a term now
NB, yeah,
people
yeah,
use? Yeah.
it's just it's kind of like NB, like non-binary,
Non-binary. Yeah.
but it's ENBY in case anybody
Ian,
wants. Yeah.
right. Okay.
So now you're in the know. But at that time we were using the term genderqueer, and I felt really comfortable in that space. And I have to say, it was a really difficult space to be in, because I was living in New York at that time, and riding the subway. My greatest fear was like really young kids, of like, who is that, a boy or a girl? and like
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of conversation, because little kids, they just want to know, they're
Yeah.
learning gender, but in a very binary way. I'm like, oh God. And now the parents are going to gaze at me and they're like, I don't know, honey, or like,
Uh-huh.
so that period of time was pretty challenging for me because, ultimately I'm a guy, and I was like, I think I want to take that next step for
Yeah.
myself to really align how the world sees me with how I see myself. And so I started taking testosterone I guess like October, and this was probably 2000, 2003 or 2004. I don't know. So this is a while ago. But then that holiday, I went home to visit my family in Florida in December. So I already 3 months on testosterone. And by that point, you start to see some noticeable changes. Not,
Yeah.
it's not like I came home with a beard or anything like that, but like
Testosterone is powerful stuff, though.
super powerful,
Yeah.
right? And so it was at the point my voice was shifting, but it sounded like I just had a cold all the time, but it was slightly different than that, right? And so as soon as I came home, my mom was like, are you sick? Like, what's going on? Like she knew something
Mm,
was off.
yeah.
Moms have those kind of
Oh, they're
spidey
smart.
sense.
Yeah.
And my dad would probably just was like sticking his head in the sand, like, what's going on now? But I just remember we were in a car, we were driving, and my mom just confronted me. She's like, what is going on? You're not sick. And I was like, Mom, I'm transgender. I'm taking testosterone. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have top surgery. Like
Whoa.
all of that, I just kind of like I did the complete opposite of how I came out around my sexual orientation. And
Wow.
she was just like, "What?"
Was she really
Um,
hurt that you hadn't brought her in on that journey earlier?
um,
I'm just the mom in me is like, I just would have
yeah,
wanted to support my kid.
I know, I know.
But it's your, I'm not judging. I'm really not.
Oh
I'm just
yeah,
wondering if she shared any of that or if she experienced any of that.
I think so. I think so. I think she, because I guess like the first time when I came out, I think she reflected back on that of like, okay, we could have been more skillful in how we
Yeah.
like responded. And so I think she was more on eggshells, like when I shared that information of like, okay, my kid is like independent, like is like voluntarily coming home to remain engaged in our lives and building history as an adult together. And I think she just I'm not sure. I mean, I think definitely they probably both want to be a part of that journey a little bit earlier, especially now, when we're all reading about like these positive interactions with parents and their trans kids, and
Yeah.
even these ceremonies, they have renaming ceremonies now.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a thing when I came out, at least in the worlds that was occupying. But the idea of renaming ceremonies is like you bring your parents or your loved ones in,
Yeah.
you kind of land on a name that has meaning for the family and feels in alignment with who you are, and then you have a celebration around that I wish that was around, in
Yeah.
my
I'll bet.
yeah, but I kept my legal name is Rhodes Perry, so my middle
Okay.
name
So
is
you,
actually Rhodes, and I kept the J for my parents, and it stands for Jackson for me, and I'm sure for them it probably stands for my birth name, but
sure. I
those
mean,
kind
it
of
just a way to honor your
yeah,
journey, I suppose.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So
cool.
and for them and my dad, I think that shift, because when I was a kid, in his eyes, I was always, I was like quote unquote daddy's girl, right? Like, we had that kind
Yeah.
of like really strong bond relationship, and it shifted. It really
Oh,
shifted, and
I'm
because he was my
sorry.
best friend, I mean, he was my best friend when I was a little kid, and he was always there at all of my sporting events and things like that. I think that was the hardest transition
I
of
was
like,
just going to ask you what was the biggest struggle of all of it? And you read
yeah,
my mind.
totally. Yeah, we're simpatico. That's good. We're vibing.
Has that righted itself with your dad?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think like the shifting points. I think it was when I started working at PFLAG. So I was working at PFLAG in DC. So for any listener who's not familiar, PFLAG it's a national LGBT organization. They have chapters, like 350 chapters across the country, and they're largely composed of allies, mostly parents with LGBT kids. LGBT folks are a part of it as well. So I was on staff there, and I kept sharing information with him of PFLAG parents who have been on a similar journey,
Yeah.
where he was at that time, and kind of moving forward. And I think the things that were really helpful for my parents, and especially for him, is one, my first girlfriend, her parents were like the most amazing parents ever. Like that, just like as that
Nice.
model family that's like, we love our child, we love that she's a lesbian, we love that she's an activist,
That's so good.
and we're being activists side by side with her. Like that was her parents. And they're also staunchly Catholic. And so when
Wow.
that Memorial Day that I shared with you, that her parents were there with me in Gainesville, and mom said, you know what, I'm willing to sit down with your family if they ever want to talk about this, like without
Wow.
you and Alyssa, my girlfriend at the time, being there. And so that she eventually did that. And that really helped my dad, I think, a lot, just reconciling his religious beliefs and like what he really believed in his heart, which is like his unconditional love for me.
Right.
And he was able to balance that. And I think PFLAG, in addition to my ex-girlfriend's family, really helped him connect with other parents who were also Catholic and had amazing LGBT kids. And, he had those kind of role models to then say, oh, okay, I can do this, and I can get to a better place. And now he's like, he's still within the Catholic Church, and he's pushing within, which I give him a lot of
I
credit.
so admire that. Yeah.
Yes. I tell him that every day. I'm like, thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
He calls out like the Knights of Columbus, which is a more conservative part of the
Yeah.
Catholic Church
It's
that
really
donates.
important work.
Totally. So he's amazing. So,
I
but
love
it
that.
was like a decade plus long journey for him, probably 2 decades, I'd say.
Yeah.
But he is probably he and my mom, probably they're my strongest advocates,
That's
believers
so
in what I'm
beautiful.
doing. Yeah.
How did you end up transitioning into owning? I didn't, that word was the Freudian slip. I don't know. Into owning your own business is where I'm going with this. And I'm like, why did I pick that word? There's
I love
some
it.
interesting, I just listened to a revisionist history episode where they talk about Freudian slips, like words that come out and you're like, why did I pick that word? Obviously we're talking about transitioning. That's why I picked
Totally.
it. Talk
Right.
to me about taking your experience and your knowledge and starting your own business and why that was important to you and what you do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that transition is probably one of the bravest things that I've done, but I'd say like stepping out and starting my own business, that's up there. And I
It's,
think like,
yeah,
yeah. And I think my transitioning my gender gave me the confidence of like, if I can survive this and thrive, which I feel like I am, it puts everything else in perspective. It's like, okay,
yeah,
I can do this, I can do that. It allows me to be a little more bold. And what was happening for me right before I stepped out to start my own business is I was working for the city of New York, and I was leading up this office for LGBT policy and practice for this massive child welfare agency. It had like 30,000 staff all across all 5 boroughs. And what they were trying to do was to improve services for kids in foster care and juvenile justice who are LGBT. So for your listeners, for kids of color, especially if they're LGBT, they are very, very overrepresented in these systems, such as foster care and juvenile justice.
right.
Because of reasons of family rejection,
Mm-hmm.
of the
Oh,
school to prison
so sad.
pipeline. There's a lot of
Yeah,
reasons why.
yeah,
And so I got to do this incredible work for close to 5 years in really improving city services, which were so far behind. Yes, it's New York City. Yes, it's a progressive city. And sadly, the institutions that are part of the government still have a long way to go, especially for human services. And so I was doing this work, and I started getting calls from, the state of Utah or, Montana or California, asking like how I was able to implement, an LGBT specific policy, and that they were struggling and they needed help. And of course, at that time, I'm like, oh, I'm going to help everyone. It's like pro
right.
bono. Here's the game plan. Here's the
Yeah,
blueprint. And I realized like, there's something to this, like having worked in the national LGBT movement for about 5 years as well, advocating to pass these amazing laws, like changing regulations, making sure that policies were on the books to protect LGBT people. I realized like you can continue doing that, and that work still needs to be done. In the places that have these amazing laws and policies, the culture still has not caught up. It hasn't aligned with what's on paper. And people really struggle, especially, workplaces, organizations, on what does that mean and how do we actually show up to support LGBT folks. And so at some point it was like, I can continue going down this route of working for other people and having a kind of smaller platform to do really good things, or I could step out and start my own business, expand my platform, and help as many people who are ready to do this work, rather than trying to like convert
Force
those
people to be ready. Yeah.
Totally. So I took a big risk in January of 2016. I left this amazing job and I moved across the country because I was like, if I can start a business, I can live wherever I want, because hopefully the clients will come. And when I announced that I was going to do this in November, I had my first client already, and they were like, we can't wait to work with you.
Amazing.
We're doing some work out in Portland. And so I was like, okay, this is it. So I started with one client, and I've been in business for almost 3 years. My anniversary for starting my consulting practice is October 21st, I think. So almost
cool.
nearing 3 years, and it's been incredible. And it's very like, it's an analogy of transition, I think, where it's like I'm the architect of my own career now, just like I'm the architect of my own life, my own gender, and it's something that we all have within us. Like, we are creators, and we just, sometimes we need to have the vision, or we need to have the clarity of where we want to go. And I think once we have that, we can be unstoppable. I feel like I'm doing that. It's more of a practice than something that I figured out, but it's, I lean on these things.
Conscious work. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
I love it. I dig it. And you have a new book out.
I do. Yes.
What's it called?
It's called Belonging at Work. It's everyday actions that leaders in the workplace can take to cultivate diverse and inclusive organizations. And it's also a book for anyone who is in the workplace who feels that, more could be done to either allow them to be more authentic in their jobs, or for, if you're managing other people, to really showcase that differences are what makes your organization strong.
Yes.
And it provides the really concrete actions that you can take. You don't have to be the CEO. You don't have to be the executive director, the commissioner, whatever. As long as you're in the workplace, you have a role to be a leader and to really welcome difference, and really make sure that you're leveraging that to be ready for the 21st century workplace, which is very, very different.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about companies honoring the whole employee, but it's, the same concept. I love it. So links to Rhodes' book will be on the show notes. You want to go check it out. So make sure you do that. I really think you and I could talk for a very long time, friend.
Yes.
It's already a much longer interview than I normally do, but I just couldn't stop it. It was too great. But I do have 2 closing questions I have to ask you.
Yes.
I don't have to, but I want to. The first one is, all of these things, all of these transitions, all of these changes, all of these brave, brave moments, how do you stop and honor them with celebration?
I love that question. And I think it's a struggle for me because I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, once I hit a goal, it's like I want to move the goalpost before, doing that celebration touchdown dance or whatever.
Yep.
And I am conscious of that. And so I try to do something every quarter of the year. So every season,
awesome.
I try to take a couple of days off, ideally a week, and just to go out in nature and reset. Yeah. And most recently, I just came back from a cycling adventure, Cycling Oregon, if anyone's familiar with. So it's a week-long cycling adventure out in rural parts of Oregon. It's incredible. And I still feel like the vacation bliss, and I'm celebrating having this book done.
Absolutely
celebrating my successes. So
I really love that. I love the concept. Might be one of my favorite answers to this question, which I ask every week. And I've noticed with myself and with, all sorts of professionals, whether you are an entrepreneur or not, just like you said, right when you get to the end, you want to push it to a new goal. And I love that. I think you should do that. But I think in order to reach that new goal, it's important to pause and reflect and be grateful for what you've already accomplished. So this idea of quarterly building in a gratitude practice and a celebration is such a gift. I love it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, thank you for sharing it. I think it's great. And so then the last question I have, which I ask every week, and I imagine you probably have multiple answers to this, but we're going to get just one. What is your favorite charitable organization to support?
Well, yes, I have many, and I will say that since we've been talking about transitioning on the show, the National Center for Transgender Equality, hands down, doing really amazing, amazing policy and advocacy work out of DC. Tough time to do that in this current political
Yeah, it sure
environment,
is. Ooh.
and they're a force. And so every time I write a check or donate time to phone bank, however I'm giving to them, I know that, I mean, they're such good stewards of the resources, and they literally are saving people's lives.
I love that. So, you guys, I always ask you to get involved. And I love that, Rose, that you just said phone banking, right? It doesn't have to be money. If you have money, that's great. Organizations that are doing this kind of work, they need money, they need awareness. But if you have just a few minutes to phone bank or to be there and be supportive or share their website or their Facebook page, we're working together, right? We're working together to make a stronger, healthier world and community. And we need your support to do that. So, Rhodes, would you share your 3 words with us one last time?
Yes. Freedom, adventure, create.
I dig it. And I think that you have done all of the hard work to allow yourself the freedom to adventure and create.
Yes.
Just pretty cool.
I love it.
Awesome.
This is so fun.
This has been so much fun. So many gifts, parenting gifts, connection gifts. Thank you so very, very much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, that's what we have for today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I will be back next Thursday with a brand new episode. For now, this is Heather Vickery reminding you, as always, to choose bravely. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks. Check it out for yourself and get your 30-day free trial, including 1 free audiobook. Simply visit audibletrial.com/thebravefiles and voila, free audiobooks. What could be better than that? The Brave Files is proudly supported by Lost Format Apparel, a socially conscious clothing company. You already know that homelessness is a huge problem. Over 500,000 Americans are living without shelter and millions more without consistent access to everyday basics. My friends at Lost Format know that solving homelessness is a much larger problem than any one company or person can solve on their own. It requires teamwork, sacrifice, strength, and building communities through personal and professional relationships. And isn't that exactly what the Brave Files podcast is all about? That's why I'm proud to say that the Brave Files has partnered with Lost Format, and together we're working to change the face of consumerism in addressing homelessness. You can now get one of 2 fantastic shirts custom designed specifically for the Brave Files. Each order goes towards providing necessities to the homeless. We have one shirt that, of course, says choose bravely, and another that reminds you that brave is always greater than fearless. Head on over to vickeryandco.com/store to see both beautiful shirts and to check out the entire product line from Lost Format. All of their stuff is super soft and comfortable and has an amazing fit. Use promo code BRAVE to get 10% off of your Brave Files custom t-shirts. And if you have an order over $30, your shipping is free. I choose bravely to take the plunge to help solve homelessness. Are you with me?
Thank you for listening to The Brave Files. Be sure to visit thebravefilespodcast.com to access the show notes and discover fantastic bonus content. Music composed and produced by Matt Lewis of Union Music, LLC.
Special thanks to our editor and audio mix expert, Andrew Olson. I am eternally grateful for all that he does to make each week sound so fantastic. You can hear more of Andrew's work at findandrewolson.com.